Lord, be with the Driscoll family at this time of their passing. Rejoice, help them to comfort them, strengthen them, Father. And Lord, be with the rest ones that are sick, help them to get over this virus. You said it was going to be with them. Christ, in Christ. Amen. Thank you, Justin.
Yeah, our hearts go out to the Driscoll family, especially wondering how Jim is going to take this and what a negative effect it'll have on him. But Carl says Lyle is doing a lot better, and Chris is a lot better. Aaron has a residual cough, but everybody is getting better. He said Susan was too mean to get it. I said, well, so was Jeannie. All right. We're going to be on bringing the later Judean ministry to a close this morning as I study with you two different stories. One involves the woman taken in adultery, and then followed on its heels is the story of the blind man who was healed. And then we're going to get into the parable of the Good Samaritan. I mean the prodigal son. We studied the Good Samaritan last week or two. And I'm going to point out again some things that are generally not brought out when you study American commentaries. All right, let's turn to John chapter 8. Again, we are in the later Judean ministry, but we're just on the horizon of his last ministry, the Perean ministry. In John chapter 8, verse 2, well, we find Jesus on the Mount of Olives. Then he goes back to Jerusalem. He goes to the temple. And immediately the scribes and the Pharisees are trying to entrap him. Now, they wanted to kill Jesus for several reasons. Can you name some? Do any reasons come to your mind? All right.
He cleansed the temple.
That was intolerable. He claimed to be equal with God. He claimed to forgive sins. He healed on the Sabbath. The disciples didn't wash their hands when they ate during the feeding of the 5,000, as seen in Matthew 15, verse 2. And for these reasons, they were out to kill him. But they had to have a specific charge. And they're trying to get a charge right here. So they bring to him a woman taken in adultery. And they think that he cannot get out of this. All right? So the scribes and the Pharisees, verse 3, John 8, bring a woman taken in adultery, and having set her in the midst, saying to him, Teacher, this woman hath been taken in the act, in adultery, in the very act. Now, what does that tell you? How come this is sinister on the part of the scribes and the Pharisees? They did not bring the man, which means they're not interested in justice. They're interested in putting him in a quandary out of which he can't work. The law of Moses said if a man or a woman were taken in the act of adultery, they were both to be stoned. If it was the daughter of a priest, she was to be burned. Now, the Jews could kill people 4 different ways without, they could never crucify, but they could kill people 4 different ways. Strangulation, burning, beheading. Let's see, strangulation, beheading, burning, and the other one. I don't have this written down. It was just off the top of my head. But they can never crucify under any circumstances. So back to Acts John 8, verse 5. They remind him what the law of Moses says. Can you imagine that? Reminding the Son of God what the law of Moses said. Now in verse 6, and this they said, trying him, that they might have whereof to accuse him. Now, do you think they had a right to take this woman and bring her to Jesus? Or did they take on something they didn't have a right to do? All right, they had a right to do it. Because this is called the rebel's beating. They punished two different ways. There was scourging, and then there was the rebel's beating. When a person was caught guilty of something, they were first taken to the elders of the synagogue. Then they were taken to a tribunal or a lower Sanhedrin. But the first step was the elders of the synagogue. But like I said, and used Wayne as an example, I went up to him one time and grabbed his collar. That's what they could do if it was clearly known that that person was violating a law or a precept under the law of Moses. Adultery was a violation. They had the right to grab her and bring her to justice. But they should have brought the man also. It does nullify that. That's right. They obey what they want to obey, Stan. That's right. They obey strictly that part of the law which they agree with. Much like people do today. You know, we, in our society, we have people protesting laws that they don't like, but they have to go 70 on a highway or they get a ticket. You know, they can't kill their neighbor or they'll be imprisoned. They obey these laws, but they protest these other laws. And we have the same mentality today. Same mentality. So Jesus stooped down, verse 6, and with his finger wrote on the ground. Now, we don't know if this was the Sabbath day. If it was illegal to write on the ground on the Sabbath day. Now, this was oral law. This was not God's written law. And so the chances are Jesus was violating a oral precept of the Jewish people. Now, when they continued asking him, verse 7, he lifted up himself and said unto them, he that is without sin among you, let him cast a stone at her. Jesus was not condoning the sin of this woman. They had made him the judge in this case. And the judge can show mercy if he wants to, right? He can show mercy. The book may say this, but the judge can show mercy and overrule the book. Now, stoning. I've heard a lot of people in the Lord, in my ministry, gospel meetings and whatever, say that they picked up a stone that was as big as a cantaloupe and they would throw them at the accused person. No. They picked up a stone that was gut-wrenching. They could barely pick it up. What was the idea? The idea was to kill that person on the first stone, with the first stone. Here's the way the Jews did it. What would you say if the accused person were 5 feet 5? You go, what in the world is he getting at? I'm about to tell you. Does anything strike your fancy? What if the person were 5 feet 2? All right, let's take the 5 feet 2, 5'2" woman, assuming she was that. They find a cliff that was 10 feet 4 inches, twice the height of the accused. If the man were 6 feet, then they would find a 12-foot cliff. They would take the accused on top of that cliff and throw them down with intents of killing them. If the fall did not kill them, then the first witness was to pick up that gut-wrenching stone, walk to the edge of the cliff. He couldn't throw it, but he could roll it off his arms. And the idea was to kill that individual. If that did not kill that individual, then the others were allowed to pick up big stones and throw at them. They would aim at the heart, they would aim at the head, because they wanted to kill him. All right, so now in verse 8, again he stooped down and with his finger wrote on the ground a second time. We don't know if he drew pictures, words, if he was just doodling, or if he actually wrote the accusation. Would somebody turn to Jeremiah 17, verse 3? I left my big Bible at home. Jeremiah 17, 3. Yes. Yeah. Oh no, it's 13. Yeah, it's 13. 17, 13. Yes. Thank you, Carl. They shall be written where? In the earth, on the dirt. Was this what was taking place with this adulterous woman? We do not know. In other words, Jesus could have been writing down her charge or the accusation that the scribes and Pharisees were bringing against her. Why do you think he stooped down a second time, though? Okay? All right. I think this is the picture. He stooped down the first time so that they could find let them talk amongst themselves to see which one claimed to be a witness to this ill deed. I think he wrote down on the ground a second time, giving these scribes and Pharisees an opportunity to leave. Okay? Because he said, "He that is without sin among you, let him cast the first stone." None of them were willing to do that. Why weren't they? In fact, the chances are they were guilty of adultery with this same woman. Because there are other passages that show that the Pharisees were guilty of adultery. And this woman, being a prostitute, may very well have been their companion. And their conscience wouldn't let them throw the first stone. And according to Judaism, this was in the Sanhedrin. It didn't matter what setting it was. The younger ones in the Sanhedrin voted first. Why would they vote first and not the seniors or the elders? Exactly. If the older, more revered elders of the synagogue voted, that would tend to influence a lot of the younger ones, like Chuck said. So they were supposed to vote first, and the older ones would not be swayed or influenced by their voting. Whenever there is a crowd gathered, such as this one here in John 8, the older ones left first. They always had the prerogative. and the younger ones filed after them. It was, I even remember growing up, as I was growing up, we had these fellowship meals at congregations and in our own private houses. We had them all the time, didn't we? Who ate first? The older ones. Who eats first today? We have totally reversed the culture of Judaism and early American culture. And so, anyway, in verse 9, they, when they heard it, went out one by one, beginning with the elders, even unto the last. Jesus was left alone with the woman, and what did he tell the woman? Go and sin no more. Did he condone her sin? No. Just don't do it again. And many times we've done that with our children. We catch them doing something wrong, say, son, just don't do it again. Just don't do it again. Look at John chapter 9. John chapter 9, the healing of the blind man. Now here we have and by the way, we mentioned scribes a while ago, the scribes and the Pharisees. As I said last week, there were four sects of the Jews. There were the Pharisees. Typically, this is the typical view. Pharisees, Sadducees, the Essenes, and the Herodians. The scribes were not a sect, okay? Neither were the Pharisees. The scribes constituted an office. The Pharisees constituted a fraternity. Just like your college fraternities, your Sadducees constituted a sect. All right, so now in John chapter 9, and as he passed by, he saw a man blind from his birth. This is the only miracle in the Bible where Jesus healed a man born blind. These others were blinded because of accidents, diseases, whatever you want to call it. But this man was born blind. So here we have a miracle which shows beyond all doubt that Jesus could not have snookered his audience. Everybody knew this man, and everybody knew this man was born blind. And therefore, what Jesus did could not be repudiated. Jesus answered, now, they asked him, the disciples did, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he should be born blind? This was the mindset of the Jews. They believed that if anybody had a physical debility or debilitation, any kind of health issue, it was a direct result of sin. Either that person sinned or somebody else sinned. Now, we've all known of babies that were born with serious physical problems because their parents were alcoholics or they were druggies, or because of something the parents did, the child came into this world. As innocent as that baby is, that baby had to suffer the consequences of that parent's evil living. And so Jesus said, neither did this man or his parents sin. Now look at verse 5. When I'm in the world, I am the light of the world. What did Jesus say in Matthew 5:16 in the Sermon on the Mount? Who was the light of the world? You. Ye are the light of the world. Here he says, I am the light of the world. As long as Jesus was on the earth, he was the light of the world. But he knew when he was gone, the apostles would be the light of the world. Now understand, in Matthew 5, he was still on earth. But he's painting a picture of the future when he would be gone. And you guys are going to be the light of the world. We are. We are. In fact, Dale, the same application, Matthew 5:16. We are the light. He was specifically talking to his apostles in Matthew 5, but the principle applies to us today. And in verse 7, and said unto him, Go wash in the pool of Siloam. Now, the word Siloam means sent. The pool of Siloam was inside Jerusalem. There was a pool just on the southeast side of Jerusalem called Gihon, Gihon. When Sennacherib was going to attack Judah, Hezekiah built a tunnel from Gihon, which would, if you will, down here in the right lower corner, and tunnel through underneath the walls of Jerusalem to form this pool called Siloam. And Siloam is the pool where this blind man was to go wash. Now, the thing about the pool of the tunnel of Hezekiah was that it was 6 feet tall, 2 feet wide, and 371 feet long. It was zigzag shape. The interesting thing is that Hezekiah had architects and builders, stonecutters working from both ends, working toward the middle. They were only off a ½ inch when they met. This was not a straight tunnel, which I think would be impossible for them to meet. This was a zigzag tunnel. How in the world did they have the ingenuity to know to do that? All I can say is that God endowed mankind with wisdom in whatever age he lived in. Whatever age. Look at some of the most phenomenal things. Stonehenge. How in the world could they build Stonehenge or the pyramids? The Mayas built some of the most fantastic, earth structures that have ever been witnessed by mankind. We don't know how they did this. All right, so now the pool of Siloam. So he goes, and by the way, archaeologists have unearthed this pool. And there are 33 steps that lead down into the pool of Siloam. 33 steps. This man was not told to go dip himself or swim. He was told to go pick up some water. Now, what did Jesus do? Tell me the cure that Jesus was going to give this man, at least the physical cure. What did he have him do? What did Jesus do? All right, he spit on the ground and he mixed it together and made a little paste. And then he put it on the guy's eyes, and then the guy was supposed to go wash it off. Now, we know there was no power in the clay, no more than in the water when Naaman was baptized or immersed, if you want to say it that way. We know that the power was in Jesus Christ, but this is what he did. And then in then he says in verse 11, and so I went away and washed, and I received my sight. Now, these scribes and Pharisees have cornered him, and they're trying to find a charge against Jesus. It didn't work with the adulterous woman, so they're now going to try to find it with regard to this man. And in verse 13, they bring to the Pharisees him that aforetime was blind, and now it was the Sabbath day. A Sabbath day, by the way. You see, the American Standard and the King James, I think the King James says the Sabbath day. It was not the Sabbath day. This was not a weekly Sabbath. The definite article, the, always points out the weekly Sabbath. How do I know this? Because this was there was a feast that took place. There was the Feast of Tabernacles and the Feast of Dedication. This was the Feast of Dedication that was taking place. This was the Sabbath of that feast. All right? There were 13 Sabbaths in addition to the 52 weekly Sabbaths. There were 13 Sabbaths related to feasts. For example, the first 7 days before the Passover, those were all Sabbath days. 7 Sabbaths in a row. All right? And so this was one of those feasts, one of those Sabbath days. The Feast of Dedication and the Feast of Tabernacles. What was another name for the Feast of Tabernacles? Or do you know what it was supposed to commemorate? The Feast of Tabernacles commemorated the time when the Jews were going through the wilderness, having left Egypt, and they dwelt in booths or tents. The word tent in Greek is tabernacle, all right? So they, and even to this day, the Orthodox Jews live in tents in their backyard for the 8-day festival called the Feast of Tabernacles or the Feast of Booths, whichever. Now, it took place in October. Then 2 months later, December 25th, on our Christmas Day, is the Feast of Dedication. The Feast of Dedication was an outgrowth of the time when the Maccabees defeated Antiochus Epiphanes of the Seleucidae family. He was one of the Seleucidae family came from one of the generals. Seleucus was one of the generals of Alexander the Great, and he gave birth to a lot of Seleucidae members. Antiochus Epiphanes IV was one, and he ruled Syria, but he controlled Palestine, and he desecrated the temple. He offered a sow on the altar. He spread blood on the walls of the Holy of Holies. He did everything that was inhumane. Well, Judas Maccabeus started a civil war with he and his 5 sons, which lasted 30 years. At the end of the 30 years, they toppled Antiochus and destroyed him. Then they rededicated the temple to God. And that's the Feast of Dedication, which they still observe every December the 25th. The Feast of Dedication is also called the Feast of Lights. The Feast of Lights. Because every household in Jerusalem was lit up. Every room. Everything was lit up. All the temple. There were several candelabras. They were all lit up. Those who have been over there during the Feast of Dedication say that it is like one big bright bulb. You can fly over the whole Middle East and you can pick out Jerusalem because it's one big light bulb. They had thousands of lights going on. The population of Jerusalem at this time was 55,000. And they all had lights on. On the first day of the feast, they lit one light. On the second day, they lit 2 lights. On the 8th day, they lit 8 lights. And so this was the feast that we're talking about. And this was the Sabbath of the Feast of Dedication. Any questions? Yes, Ben.
Can we go back to the woman taking adultery?
Yes.
Okay. I agree with you what you were saying, but to me, I think there's more sinister ideas there than what you brought out. If the older one left the younger, stronger woman, they got everything they wanted. As Sam brought out, they sinned and not bringing them back.
Right.
The younger one stones her. Now they got Jesus in trap. They didn't mind giving up the woman. they're pretty clear because they didn't throw the stone. So they were throwing the younger under the bus, in my way of thinking. You know, if they, like what they wanted, they had Jesus in trap there because the younger would have thrown the stones. They're free, clear, and so to me, I see a more sinister.
Well, they would certainly censure in every possible way.
way. And as wise as Jesus is, he could see it before they even made the move. Just like a master chess player, he knows exactly what his opponent's going to do. Yes, Eric.
Maybe some of these men, these Pharisees, knew this woman. So maybe they did bring the man, they just didn't identify with him.
Maybe they want.
Maybe they brought the men, they just didn't identify them because they were in their crowd. Because
Yeah.
In fact, that's right. He could have very well been in that crowd. Very well. All right. Appreciate those thoughts. Tell you what, I want to get into this. Carl, would you mind helping? Thank you. Wayne, would you mind doing? When I studied with you the Good Samaritan, I told you that a lot of what I learned about this parable came from the Jewish lectures that I attend, Jewish seminars I attend every couple of years. Amazing what comes to light when you have a Hebrew scholar talking about these things. My notes on the prodigal son are based upon the Hebrew lectures, plus a book entitled Jacob and the Prodigal by Kenneth Bailey. Kenneth Bailey is a professor in Jerusalem, in a Hebrew university in Jerusalem. He is thoroughly, that's an American name, but he is thoroughly Judaistic in his thinking, just like this scholar who hosts these seminars. He is an American, but he was trained at the feet of the rabbis. He's got his doctorate in Hebrew education. He's as fluent in Hebrew and Jewish culture as any Jew could ever be. They have revealed I think I need a copy. Thank you very much. Thanks, Carl. Wayne. Luke 15 is only one parable, albeit in 3 illustrations. Now, if you read Luke, turn to Luke 15. Now, we are in the Perean ministry at this time. The Judean ministry has been fulfilled. Jesus crosses over the Jordan into the eastern country called Perea, which borders on the Decapolis. All right? Now, remember, the prodigal son leaves Perea and he goes across the border into the Decapolis. He can no longer stay in Perea because he will be killed. We'll get into that in just a moment. Now, in verse 1 of Luke 15, now all the publicans and sinners were drawing near unto him to hear. And both the Pharisees and the scribes murmured, saying, This man receiveth sinners and eateth with them. And he spake unto them this parable. This parable. He breaks this parable down into 3 parts. This can be confirmed by both the English and the Greek language. So this is one parable. All right? Verse 3. Let me skip to the next paragraph. The second illustration I don't know if I have time to get through all of this. As the parable progressed, paragraph 1, the value of what is lost increases. The first illustration is that of the lost sheep. The shepherd wanders over the hillsides for the lost sheep. When he finds it, he throws a party. For whom? For the sheep as well as for himself. Sheep were very valuable, providing wool and milk, which they either sold or used for their own family's needs. On rare occasions, they would eat the meat. The second illustration involves a woman who lost a coin. The coin is worth more than a day's wages. Even today, Bedouin women wear coins of significant value on chains around their necks or stitched to their clothes. In Jesus' day, these coins functioned kind of like our bank deposit boxes do today. Where she finds it, when she finds it, she has a party. For whom? For the coin and for herself. Let's consider a typical Galilean house. Even though Jesus was in Perea when he told this parable, it was made of dark stone with very few windows. In some rooms, floors were simply beaten earth or mud plaster. So with little light and a rough floor, there were many hiding places for a little coin. The only assistance a woman would have in her search would be a coarse broom made of straw or date palm stems and a small oil lamp that provided light from a single flame. Finding a lost coin would have been a dusty, tiresome work. Also, in this day and time, the mark of a married woman was a headdress made of 10 silver coins linked together by a silver chain. For years, a girl would scrape and save all she could to amass her 10 coins. For this headdress was almost the equivalent of her wedding ring. When she finally got it, it was so inalienably hers that it could not even be taken from her for debt. So if she was in debt to somebody, they could never take that. All right? They could not take her outer robe. They could take her inner garment called a tunic and all of this. It may well be that this lost coin was one of these coins that the woman in our parable lost. And she searched for it as any woman would search if she had lost her wedding ring. This particular drama of this parable is better called the parable of the two lost sons, or the parable of the forgiving father. The younger son being a picture of one who is running as far away from God as possible, like Jonah, while the older son is a picture of a Christian who doesn't yet understand and appreciates his relationship to God. The father in this parable represents both God and Jesus. The son represented something of even higher value than the sheep or the coin. In first century Judaism, sons in particular were priceless to a family. The loss of a son was a great tragedy. Both boys are lost in that they have both separated themselves from their father's love, the older son by doing good, and the younger son by doing evil. They neither love their father nor one another. This father loves his sons so much that he will allow them to make their own choices, even if it is the wrong choice. He will still be there for them, yearning for their healing and restoration. Both sons see their father not as a loving father, but as the one holding the money bag. Each member of this family fits into the proper interpretation of this parable. So the older son is staying there strictly to get what's left by his father. He's not there because he loves his father. The younger son asks for his inheritance while his father is still living. Now, this was unacceptable in Jewish society. He wanted his inheritance more than he wanted his father to live. The request was the same as if he had asked his father to die. In Jewish culture, a father would have slapped such a child across the face and driven him from home. This father shocks his audience by continuing to love his son and dealing kindly with him. So let me stop and interject this thought. No son had the right to ask for his inheritance while his father was living. That was strictly the father's decision. In this scenario, both sons received their inheritance, but neither son could spend their inheritance as long as the father was alive. They could own it, but they could not dispense with it or reap the benefits of it until their father died. And this makes it horrible because the younger son sold his inheritance when his father was still alive. All right, notice. And he divided unto them his living, verse 12. The elder son received 2/3, while the younger son received only 1/3. The elder brother is just as guilty as his younger sibling. Now, this is called the law of primogeniture. That is, give the older one 2/3 and give the younger one 1/3. We're dealing with two sons. It's a little different with multiple sons. Now, the father did not have to follow the law of primogeniture. He did not. He could divide his inheritance any way he wanted to. It was not God's law that the older son get 2/3. That was just customary, the way it was generally done. He could have given the younger son 2/3 and the older one 1/3. Here's the one restriction, and I've got the scriptures on this. The law of primogeniture applied, this is God's law, applied if there was another marriage, like Abraham and Sarah, if there was another marriage, and Hagar bringing into it, and that son was the oldest, then he had a natural son, he could not bypass that stepson. He had to give him 2/3. He was obligated. Outside of that, oh, I thought you raised your hand, Carl. I guess you were flipping pages. So let's get down to the last paragraph on page 390. After receiving his inheritance, the younger son sold it. The phrase gathered all together, verse 13, is a Greek verb used as a financial term meaning turned into cash. So gathered all together means he turned it into cash. He sold it. He liquidated it. As he does so, the embarrassment becomes public knowledge and the family is shamed before the entire community. He sold the property quickly. The King James says, not many days after, verse 13, knowing that village anger against him was rising as a result of his having shamed his father. To discourage anyone from committing this terrible offense, the community developed what is called the Kazaza Ceremony, in which the whole Jewish community cut off all relations with the guilty party. The Kazaza Ceremony. That's what the boy was running from. He didn't want to be caught because he would be cut off. What does that mean in Judaism? That means your name could never be spoken, not even by your mother and father or your siblings. That means you were treated as though you were never born. You were ousted from the synagogue. On and on. We'll continue this next week. I see these little bodies floating around. Thank you.